Welcome to Metroidvania Mania, a series wherein I talk about any given Metroidvania on my radar to determine what worked, what didn't, and what was a bit out of the box within the context of the game in question being a Metroidvania game. Today I'm looking at Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight, and it is okay. Now, believe me when I say that I really want to like this game a lot as a game. After all, it has no insignificant role in inspiring a lot about the game I'm trying to make, down to its origins and up to most of the aesthetic. I mean, look at it. Each area has its own character that's supported by the enemies and hazards in those areas, and each one is tied together by just how gosh darn gorgeous it is. The animations, specifically for Kaho, the player character, have such a fluidity to them. Based on the Momodora archive, wherein the developer shares some snapshots of the development process, it's abundantly clear that Kaho's art and animation were some of the most important aspects of this project to the developer. On that same hand, each boss has similarly unique and creative aesthetic ideas to them, and while I'll get into my gameplay gripes with many of the bosses going forward, each of them did something very different with their attack animations and tells. The music is also abundantly atmospheric and complements the game's look and feel appropriately, another aspect you want to try to get right in a Metroidvania title. Any standalone clip of the game immediately gets you interested in the thing. I imagine the success of the game's aesthetic is what got many people on board with the game. It certainly is what hooked me. However, as a Metroidvania title, and indeed as a game broadly, it has some glaring issues. Let's just dig right in. Oh yeah, spoilers. You know when you're playing an RPG and after a while you get pretty annoyed at the forced battling you gotta do?
Is that...
No.
It's not that this
Game shouldn't make you feel like this, Ben.
I know.
You start optimizing your paths and doing what you can to actively avoid playing the game you're sure you enjoyed, at least to some extent. Well, Momodora has this unfortunate issue. As an action platformer, that takes 3 to 4 hours to complete. Momodora's combat mechanics have 3 key elements. 1. Kaho's melee attacks. This is your heavy hitter. Your attacks aren't quick, but they're punchy and feel really nice to connect. 2. Kaho's ranged attacks. You have a quick, accurate, and long-range bow and arrow attack you can employ. These are often used to pick off enemies or shower them as they get into melee range, and later in the game becomes chargeable for burst damage if you can manage the timings correctly. 3. Kaho's usable items. These are a host of support items you can get throughout the game, and you have 3 equip slots to use them from. Personally, I just use healing items for the most part, though some increase your damage and cause unique effects, which I appreciated at times. So, I forgot to mention that there's also dodging and dashing and that stuff. I get into that stuff later, but just to put that in there, that is technically part of the combat mechanics that I didn't put in here. But I'm literally about to get to it. Don't stop yelling at me, please. God, please stop. I don't want this bullying. Please, enough. No, but stop. I beg, please. At face value, this all seems good, and for a large part, it is. However, things are taking a turn for the monotonous pretty quickly, because the enemies you see in the first couple areas feel just like the enemies later on, just reskinned with more HP. That they have more health means that dispatching them is a bit more of a task, and it makes your punchy melee attacks that much less satisfying, and you'd basically feel like you'd played through the same challenge, but longer a bunch of times. This makes you just want to avoid fighting altogether, but the evasion mechanics in the game are more conducive to avoiding a single blow at the right moment, not running past and avoiding hit after hit and enemy after enemy. If you're not careful, you'll quickly find yourself overwhelmed, especially after pulling a couple witch enemies at once. The moment-to-moment gameplay definitely favors the slow and methodical approach, but since you'd always have to employ the same exact method to most basic encounters, it gets old pretty quickly. Momodora's combat is at its best when you're fighting a boss with interesting movesets that you can't simply cheese. The Big Tit Witch Bitch and the Cursed Cunt Queen of Karst are 2 legitimately exciting boss battles that felt great, challenging, and played to the strengths of the game's mechanics. Against these bosses, you can formulate strategies where you charge up arrows when it's too dangerous to attack them up close and lane to them until you notice they're charging their next attack, which you'll learn in a Dark Soulsy trial and error sort of way. Sadly, again, just 2 bosses. Although, one of them you fight twice. I guess that's cool. The other bosses, though, are either easily cheesed with arrows or arbitrarily immune to arrows. The intent of the arrows is sort of perplexing. Much of the game leans into abusing the arrows. You get several powers that improve the bow passively without having to equip anything for it, while most of the other upgrades, including the cat transformation, which is literally required to beat the game, are item equips. But then, out of nowhere, you're fighting whole boss fights where the bow is completely useless. The game punishes you for using a mechanic that most of the rest of the game actively encourages you to use, and itself feels nice to use when it works. When using the bow on bosses you can cheese, you can see why this harsh response was implemented. The remaining bosses are utterly trivialized by using the bow hardcore, since it has virtually unlimited range and is really quick. This allows you to whittle certain bosses down pretty safely, and yeah, it's boring, but it works. However, countering this by just making some bosses arbitrarily immune to arrows just makes them frustrating to deal with because you've already internalized using the bow. It's pretty annoying that a core mechanic of the game is just locked sometimes. The thing is, Momodora already had a great formula. The queen and witch boss fights feel great, and you can get a sense of when and where you should use the bow versus bashing the boss with melee attacks instead. Neither fight is trivialized by the bow because you can't outrange the bosses and play it utterly safe, firing a consistent damage stream. You're always in range of an attack by those bosses, and on that same token, they're always in range of your attacks. It's a matter of figuring out their attack patterns, dodging them, and employing the most effective form of damage when you have an opening. These bosses feel great because they consider every core tool in the player's arsenal and are designed for them in interesting ways, rather than being completely trivialized by them or just removing them from the equation. Many people will tell you that Momodora has minimal backtracking and they'll present that as a good thing. While not untrue, this gives you the wrong idea. The developer didn't do this as a particular design choice. There definitely are points in which you reach some kind of dead end, usually granting you some kind of power that either makes other areas accessible or easier to get through. It's just that the game itself is small, so the backtracking you must do is minimized. In this case, the game's limitations saved it. However, there's plenty of optional backtracking you can do. Throughout the game, there are various pickups locked behind some sort of challenge or limitation you'll need some kind of power or key you don't have yet to get through. However, these are totally optional and essentially mini collectathons. In a game I've already criticized for its monotony and its basic combat, you aren't given a lot of incentive to want to go back and get all that optional stuff. That's called bloat, and it's not good game design. I already established that Momodora gets pretty monotonous after a while, and really the devs missed an opportunity to fix that issue by not putting as much effort in the map design and power progression. I'd like to explore the idea of making these two concepts work with each other in a later video, as I don't think Momodora is the correct title to talk about this sort of thing. The more important aspect here is that the map design and power progression are sorely lacking as independent elements, so much so that talking about how they could work together is getting ahead of ourselves. Unfortunately, Momodora uses its size as an excuse for overall lazy, if functional, map design. I call it an excuse because there are a couple times where you reach a goal and the hint for where to go next is totally cryptic if not entirely meaningless. And in at least one instance the game literally tells the player to figure out themselves. It's trying to do Dark Souls-like character-driven quests, that much is abundantly clear, but frankly there just isn't enough in the game to follow any of them up except by accident. And yeah, Dark Souls has itself done that, but not for the main fucking quest line. That the game is small and you'll figure it out in 15 minutes of exploring isn't an excuse I'm happy with. As a consequence, none of the areas are connected in any interesting or unique way. They're all just there. The power progression in Momodora is broadly similar to other Metroidvania titles. You get power-ups by exploring the map and finding them, or at least, that's what it's like for a set of them. There's also a store NPC that has different items in different areas. Those bought at this NPC are all equip items, while the ones found in the world can be permanent or equip items. I did like the idea of having power loadouts, but the game didn't push this aspect very far. Some of the stuff that you strictly need is permanent, such as the air dash, but then, confusingly, the game includes seemingly optional bow upgrades that are permanent, while the cat form upgrade is an unlimited use equip item. Overall, this gives the power-ups a very confused feeling, as if the devs weren't exactly sure how they wanted the progression to go. I feel like they probably wanted to have more permanent equips, but they ended up realizing the game wasn't going to be big enough to include them as rewards for beating bosses, so they stuck them all in stores as equip items without giving them much of a second thought. I kind of wish that all powers were equips, and you could change how Kaho plays by changing those loadouts. That could fix some of those monotony issues, if you could build equip loadouts that best suited certain areas or encounters. By far, the most bizarre choice in game design between power-ups and map design comes when trying to unlock the true ending. The true ending isn't obtained by doing something of narrative importance or mechanically impressive. It turns out there's a specific equip you gotta find somewhere on the map. How long this equip taking you to find being up to pure random chance. And you gotta use it on some mechanism found relatively earlier on to unlock an area that upgrades your main attack. This arbitrarily allows you to fight the real final boss and beat the game. If you just happen upon this without realizing there was a bad ending from not doing this trivial task, I imagine it doesn't feel all that awkward. However, there's essentially no narrative or mechanical reasoning as to why it's important for Kaho's Leaf to get a power-up. This is never indicated as something you have to do before you fight the final boss. You just have to randomly fall into it, or you get the bad ending so you explore the map until you find the stuff you gotta find. The only saving grace is that the resulting boss fight is the highlight of the game. But was it worth it? I should reiterate that ultimately, I appreciate Momodora. It's a really pretty game, and it's clear that the person behind it all really cares about their IP. It's got an aesthetic that I want to learn from, and there's still some legitimately good game design ideas in there. It's just also important to recognize particular pitfalls these games face. Ultimately, I'd like this video and series in general to be educational, so that future games like the one I'm developing myself can be that much better. If you appreciated this video that lies somewhere between review and analysis, consider sharing it with your friends. If you want to hear more about Metroidvania, you've come to the right place. In addition to making videos about Metroidvania titles, I'm currently making my very own. You can follow its development on this channel and by following me on social media outlets like Twitter. If you think it's dope that I'm doing this, consider supporting me on Patreon like VR Jane and Timothy E. If not, then you can still chat me up on my public Discord server linked below. That's all I have. I hope to catch you again when I talk about Axiom Verge next time.